Okay, I want you to picture a Sunday morning, June 7, 1998. We're in Jasper, Texas.
It's humid. It's quiet. The sun is just starting to come up.
And the sheriff, a guy named Billy Rowles, he's actually on his way out of town. He's got his golf clubs in the trunk, headed to a tournament.
It's his day off. And then the radio crackles.
It's the kind of call no one in a town like Jasper, I mean, it has, what, 8,000 people, ever really expects.
A body has been found out on Huff Creek Road, which is this isolated logging trail.
So Rowles turns the car around. He gets to the scene, and his deputy has a theory that, fits what they see.
It looks like a hit and run, and at first glance, yeah, that makes sense. Tragic, but an accident.
But this is where the story pivots. It goes from a simple traffic accident to, well, to one of the most infamous crimes in American history.
Because Raul starts walking the scene, he walks up the road, and he realizes, wait a minute, there are no skid marks.
No shattered glass from a bumper.
Nothing like that. Instead, there's a trail.
A trail.
A trail that stretched for miles. And scattered along this road, they found these just bizarre, distinct items.
Okay, like what?
Well, first, a heavy wrench with the name Barry written on it.
A Barry, okay.
Empty beer cans. And then, maybe the strangest clue of all, a cigarette lighter.
And it was inscribed with the word.
Possum.
Possum. It sounds so, I don't know, almost innocent, like a nickname.
But that lighter was the first breadcrumb in a mystery that would uncover something deeply, deeply rotten.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the murder of James Byrd Jr., but we're not just looking at the horrific details of the crime.
No, we're also unraveling the legal mystery that came after a trial where the accused claimed he wasn't even there, while his own lawyers were telling the jury that he was guilty.
Which, just on its face, that sounds completely backwards.
It is, and we're going to look at how this one case and the legal loopholes it exposed basically forced the government to rewrite the definition of a hate crime in America.
But let's stay on that road for a minute. The sheriff's got a wrench that says Barry and a lighter that says Possum. They still don't know who the victim is.
Right. He was James Byrd Jr., 49 years old, and in a small town like Jasper, he was. He was a character, a known quantity.
He used to sell vacuum cleaners.
Yeah, and he was a talented musician, played trumpet and piano. Friends called him the clown.
But in a good way, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Because he loved to entertain, he did impersonations, he was always singing, just the life of the party.
And he had a seizure disorder, which is why he walked everywhere.
Exactly. He couldn't legally drive. So seeing James Byrd walking along the side of the road in Jasper was a totally normal sight. Everybody knew him.
So Saturday night, he's at a party, having a good time. He leaves late to walk home. And the next morning, he's found. So how quickly did police connect the dots from that wrench?
Incredibly fast. A young witness saw the news reports and called in. Said, hey, I saw James Byrd in the back of a pickup truck yesterday.
And let me guess. The truck belonged to a guy named Barry.
A man named Sean Barry. Matches the wrench. So police track him down, and the whole thing just falls apart for them immediately. Through Barry, they find his two roommates.
Lawrence Brewer and John King.
And John King's nickname was Possum.
Wow. Okay, so you have the wrench, the lighter, the truck, the suspects. It feels like an open and shut case.
It seems like it, but this is where the why of it all becomes so terrifying. These weren't just three guys out looking for random trouble.
No, this goes back to the Texas prison system.
It does. King and Brewer met in the Beto Unit prison. King went in for burglary, not a minor crime, but not this.
Right.
While he was inside, he claimed he was targeted and abused. And to survive, he radicalized, he changed.
He's joined a gang.
He joined the Confederate Knights of America. It's a white supremacist gang, a protection racket, basically. So by the time King gets out and comes back to Jasper, he thinks he's a soldier in a race war.
And they found evidence of this in his apartment.
Oh, yeah. They found a copy of the Turner Diaries, which, for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically a fictional blueprint for a white supremacist revolution.
And his tattoos were pretty specific?
Extremely, including a gruesome, very detailed image of a black man hanging from a tree.
So this wasn't a robbery. This was a performance, a message.
Exactly. But here is where our deep dive gets really complicated. Because when this goes to trial, specifically John King's trial, this bizarre legal fight breaks out.
And not between the prosecution and the defense.
No. Between the defendant, John King, and his own lawyers.
Okay, this is the part I really want to get into because it just sounds unconstitutional. King is the supposed ringleader. What was his story?
His story was simple. I wasn't there.
Just a flat denial.
A flat denial. He admitted he was in the truck earlier in the night, but he insisted they dropped him off before the murder happened. He wanted to plead not guilty.
Which is a standard defense. It wasn't me. But his lawyers, they had a different plan.
His lawyers looked at all the evidence, the DNA, that lighter, and they decided that if they tried to sell the "I wasn't there" story, they'd lose all credibility with the jury.
They thought the jury would see them as liars.
And that if the jury hated them, they would 100% sentence King to death. So they came up with this strategy of concession.
What does that even mean, concession?
He wanted to stand up and tell the jury, yes, he was there, yes, he participated in the assault, but, and this is the entire legal strategy right here, it wasn't capital murder.
What's the difference?
Well, capital murder in Texas requires an underlying felony. In this case, that would be kidnapping. The lawyers wanted to argue that Byrd got into the truck willingly, so he wasn't kidnapped.
So it was just regular murder.
Exactly, which carries a life sentence, not the death penalty. They were trying to save his life by admitting he was guilty of a lesser crime.
But King is sitting at the defense table saying, I didn't do it at all. Can a lawyer just do that? Can they say, my client is guilty when he's yelling, no, I'm not?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? King was writing letters to the judge, my lawyers are selling me out. But at the time, the judge let the lawyers proceed. They just overrode him.
And it didn't work.
No, he got the death penalty anyway. But this issue was so fundamental, it actually went all the way to the Supreme Court years later.
In a different case.
In a different case, yeah. McCoy v. Louisiana in 2018. The Supreme Court ruled that the defendant is the master of his own defense. Meaning, even if the lawyer thinks it's a terrible idea, even if they think admitting guilt is the only way to save their client's life, if the client says, I am innocent, the lawyer has to argue innocence. Period.
So, by today's standards, King's trial was a violation of his rights.
Procedurally, yes. His own defense was hijacked. And, you know, it's very hard to be fair to a man like this, but he did have some holes in the evidence he wanted to attack.
Okay, let's look at those. If you're saying you weren't there, you have to explain away that lighter.
And he had an explanation. He said in their apartment, lighters were basically community property. Anyone could have grabbed the possum lighter off the table. Doesn't mean he was the one holding it that night.
And there was a thing with the shoes, too, right?
This is a big one. The police found sandals at the scene with the victim's blood all over them. They were a size 10.
And King wore
a 9.5. Sean Barry wore a size 10.
That's a physical fact. You can't really argue with shoe size.
You can't. And then, years later, you have the other co-defendant, Lawrence Brewer. Right before his own execution, he writes this statement. And in it, he claims King wasn't even there.
What? He says the whole thing was started by Sean Barry over a drug dispute.
Right. A deathbed confession that clears the supposed ringleader. Now, should you believe a radicalized murderer on death row?
Probably not. He could just be trying to cause chaos.
Almost certainly. But it casts just enough of a shadow to make you wonder.
Okay, so those are the defense theories. But we have to pivot to what the jury believed. They looked at the forensics, they heard from Sean Barry, who turned on the others, and they pieced together what happened on Huff Creek Road.
They did. And the accepted narrative is that the three of them, Barry, Brewer, and King, they saw James Byrd walking. Byrd knew Barry, so he probably thought, oh, great, a ride home.
He gets in the back of the truck.
But they don't take him home. They drive him out to that logging road. And that's where the assault starts. They beat him badly. But the beating, that was just the prelude.
This is the part that's just, it's hard to even comprehend.
They took a heavy logging chain, they wrapped it around James Byrd's ankles, and they hooked it to the back of the pickup truck.
And then they drove.
They dragged him for 3 miles.
And the awful part of this, I mean, you always hope the victim loses consciousness quickly, that the suffering ends before, you know.
The pathologist's testimony was just devastating on this point. The autopsy showed that James Byrd was alive and conscious for almost that entire 3 miles.
How could they tell?
The abrasion patterns on his body, they were consistent with someone trying to twist and turn, trying to hold his head up off the asphalt. He was fighting.
He was awake?
He was awake and fighting to protect himself while being dragged down a road. The ordeal only ended when his body hit a concrete culvert. That impact, it severed his right arm and his head.
And what did they do after that?
After that?
That act of absolute barbarism.
They unhooked what was left of his body, drove another mile, dumped his torso in front of an African-American cemetery, and then they went to a barbecue.
A barbecue.
They washed the truck and they ate food. It just speaks to a level of dehumanization that is. It's hard to process. To them, he wasn't a person.
So the jury, They didn't buy the defense.
Hmm.
King and Brewer were sentenced to death. Berry got life. And King became the first white man executed for killing a black man in Texas in modern history.
Which was a huge moment. But another legal problem came up after the convictions.
And this gets us to the legacy of the case. Because everyone called this a hate crime. It's the literal definition of one. But legally, at the federal level, prosecutors had a massive problem.
They did. Back in 1998, federal hate crime laws were based on the Civil Rights Act. And to prosecute somebody federally, the victim had to be engaged in a federally protected activity.
Can you break that down? What does that actually mean?
It means you had to be doing something specific, like voting or going to school, serving on a jury, eating at a restaurant.
But James Byrd was just walking home.
Exactly. And walking home on a public road was not a federally protected activity. So technically, the feds had no jurisdiction to charge them with a civil rights violation.
That's insane. So you can be tortured and killed specifically because of your race, but because you weren't on your way to a polling booth, the federal government's hands are tied.
That was the reality of the law at the time, and this case it blew that gap wide open for the whole world to see. It became the catalyst for change.
It started in Texas, but the big fight was in Washington.
It was. It took a decade, but in 2009, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act.
Pairing Byrd's name with Matthew Shepard, the student murdered in Wyoming for being gay.
Correct. And this new law did two huge things. First, it completely removed that federally protected activity requirement. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're targeted because of your race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, the feds can step in.
That closed that loophole.
It closed the loophole for good. It also provides federal money to help local law enforcement guys like Sheriff Billy Rawls investigate these complex crimes.
And this law has been used since.
It has. It was used to prosecute the murder of a transgender woman in 2016, a case that would not have been federal without this act. The legacy of James Byrd Jr. is literally allowing justice to be served today.
So the killers were punished, the laws were changed, a legal victory. But I want to go back to Jasper, Texas. It's been over 25 years. How is the town itself dealing with this?
It's complicated. You would think there'd be a memorial, something to mark this history. But the reaction in Jasper was largely defensive. They hated the hate crime capital label and wanted to get rid of it.
I read about the fence around his grave.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. The family put up a fence because the grave was being desecrated. People were carving racial slurs into it. But eventually, the town leaders tore the fence down.
Why?
They said it was a symbol of division, and removing it showed that the town had moved on.
But for the Byrd family, it just felt like erasing what happened, erasing the need for that protection in the first place.
And that erasure is happening. The Texas Tribune went to Jasper recently, talked to high school kids, and a shocking number of them had no idea who James Byrd Jr. even was.
That is profound. You have a man whose death literally changed federal law in the United States, and the kids in his own hometown don't know his name.
It's what happens when you try to move on too fast. You end up scrubbing away the lesson along with the stain.
Brewer was executed in 2011. He said he'd do it all over again. King in 2019. His last words were defiant. Capital punishment. Them without the capital get the punishment.
Zero remorse. Just hate right to the very end.
And it leaves you with this final thought. We have the Shepard-Byrd Act. It's a powerful tool for justice. But when you look at the fading memory in Jasper, you have to ask, can a law actually cure the culture that creates the hate?
And that's the real question, isn't it? The law can punish the result of hate. It can put monsters in prison, but it can't fix a person's heart. That work has to happen somewhere else.